I haven't had sex in 6 months, the giant Apache sister said to the rancher. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get to the story. It was an unusually cold evening in the desert, and the winds were blowing fiercely across the barren land. A lone rancher, named Ben, sat on his porch, staring out at the horizon, lost in thought. The life of a rancher was never easy, but Ben had learned to embrace the solitude. After the loss of his wife many years ago, he had withdrawn from the world, choosing the quiet of the plains over the bustling towns and noisy people. He was used to being alone, used to the silence that surrounded him, and frankly, he preferred it. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, something unexpected happened. A tall figure appeared on the dusty road leading to his cabin. Ben squinted, trying to make out the silhouette. It was a woman, and she was walking with purpose. As she got closer, Ben could see her more clearly. She was huge, taller than any woman he had ever seen, with broad shoulders and muscles that looked like they could rival any man's. She was dressed in traditional Apache attire, with a feathered headband and a leather vest that outlined her powerful frame. Ben stood up from his chair, unsure of what to do. He had heard stories of Apache warriors, but this woman was different. She wasn't just any warrior. She was a giant. The woman reached the porch and looked Ben squarely in the eye. I haven't had sex in 6 months, she said, her voice deep and commanding. Ben's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if she was flirting with him or if she was just stating a fact, but either way, it caught him off guard. He stood there, frozen, unsure of how to respond. The woman, whose name was Ayanna, smiled. Slightly, the corners of her lips curling up in a way that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. She had come to the ranch for a reason, but she wasn't going to reveal it just yet. Ben was intrigued. She didn't seem like the type of woman who would waste her time with a simple rancher like him. But there was something in her eyes, something that told him this wasn't just a casual visit. Ayanna stood still for a moment, as if waiting for Ben to say something, but he remained silent. The silence between them stretched out, but Ayanna didn't seem uncomfortable. Instead, she was patient, as though she knew that Ben needed time to process what had just been said. I've been traveling for a long time, Ayanna finally said, breaking the silence. And I've been carrying this burden for months. I need your help, rancher. Ben blinked, still unsure of what she meant. He wasn't sure if this was some sort of test or if she really needed help. But as he looked into her eyes, he could see the exhaustion behind her fierce demeanor. She was tired, and whatever burden she was carrying, it was weighing on her heavily. What kind of help? Ben asked cautiously. Ayanna took a deep breath and began to explain. She had been on a journey to find something that had been taken from her people. It was a powerful artifact, a relic that had the power to change the course of their lives, and it was hidden somewhere on Ben's land. She needed Ben's help to find it. Ben listened carefully, intrigued by the mystery surrounding Ayanna's mission. She wasn't just any Apache woman. She was a leader, a warrior, and she had come to him for assistance. As Ayanna finished speaking, Ben knew that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't have imagined. The quiet life he had built for himself was about to be disrupted, but he couldn't ignore the pull of the unknown. I'll help you, Ben said finally, his voice steady. But you'll have to explain everything along the way. Ayanna nodded, a look of appreciation crossing her face. She wasn't used to asking for help, but she had no choice. And something about Ben, his quiet strength and willingness to listen, told her that she had made the right choice. Little did Ben know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he believed about himself and about the world he thought he knew. Ben led Ayanna into the modest cabin he called home. It was small, rugged, and cluttered, but it was comfortable enough for a man who had long learned to live alone. He offered her a seat by the fire as the wind howled outside, carrying the chill of the desert night. As Ayanna settled in, Ben noticed how the firelight danced across her features, casting shadows that accentuated her strong jaw and the sharpness in her eyes. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a leader, a woman who carried the weight of her people's future on her broad shoulders. Ben wasn't sure what he had expected, but it certainly wasn't this. He had thought she was here for a simple favor, but now, with the seriousness in her voice, he realized that whatever she had come for, it was far more significant. "What exactly is it that you need help with?" Ben asked, his voice low, steady. Ayanna looked up, her gaze piercing. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "There is something hidden on your land, something that could change the fate of my people. It was stolen from us, and now I need your help to find it." Ben leaned forward slightly, intrigued but wary. "What is it?" "A sacred artifact," Ayanna replied, her tone solemn. "It holds the power to unite my tribe and bring us peace. But it was taken years ago by those who wished to see us divided. I have spent years searching for it, and now I believe it's here, on your land." Ben frowned, his mind racing. An artifact? Hidden on his land? He had no idea what she was talking about. He had lived on this property for over a decade, and there had never been anything out of the ordinary, at least nothing that seemed important. "How do you know it's here?" he asked. "I was told of its location," Ayanna explained, her voice growing soft. "But the path to it is treacherous, and the ones who took it have made sure that no one can find it without their permission." Ben stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the moonlit desert. He had lived in isolation for so long, never once questioning the land he owned. The thought that something of such significance was buried somewhere on it felt unreal. "What do you need from me?" he asked, still staring out at the barren landscape. Ayanna's voice came from behind him, steady and determined. "I need you to help me retrieve it. I cannot do it alone. The land here is vast, and the people who guard it are dangerous. But together, we can find it." Ben turned to face her, his hand resting on the edge of the table. He had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this was different. This wasn't just a simple task. It was something that could alter the course of history for Ayanna and her people. He didn't know if he was ready for something like that, but there was something in Ayanna's eyes that made him feel like this was his duty, that helping her was the right thing to do. "All right," Ben said, his voice firm. "I'll help you, but you'll have to tell me everything. About this artifact, about the people you're up against. I can't help you if I don't understand what we're up against." Ayanna nodded, her expression softening slightly. "I will tell you everything. But understand, this is not just about finding an object. It's about saving my people. It's about protecting what is ours." Ben gave a small nod, then moved to grab his coat. "We'll leave at dawn," he said, the decision made. Ayanna stood as well, her hand resting on the back of the chair. "Thank you, Ben. I know this isn't easy, but your help means everything to me." As they prepared to leave, Ben couldn't help but wonder what they would find when they ventured out into the desert. The night was quiet, but there was a sense of unease in the air. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. Nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The next morning, Ben and Ayanna set out before the first light of dawn. The air was cool, and the vast, open desert stretched before them in all its quiet emptiness. Ayanna moved with the grace of someone who had spent her life in the wilderness, her every step deliberate, as if the earth itself had become an extension of her body. Ben, on the other hand, was used to the rhythm of ranch life, the steady work of feeding cattle and mending fences, but this felt different. There was an urgency to their journey now, a sense that something important was at stake. As they rode through the desert, Ayanna spoke little, her eyes scanning the horizon. Ben respected her silence, understanding that she was preparing herself for whatever they might face. He had no idea what they were truly looking for, but something about the way Ayanna had described the artifact made him feel the weight of its importance. It wasn't just a relic. It was a symbol of hope for her people, a connection to their past, and a tool to secure their future. Hours passed as they traveled across the barren land. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the sand. Ben's mind wandered, and he found himself thinking about the life he had led on this land. He had always been alone, content with the simplicity of his routine, but now that routine felt like a distant memory. There was something about Ayanna that challenged everything he had believed about solitude. She was powerful, yet there was a vulnerability in her that drew him in. He couldn't help but wonder what had brought her to this point in her life, and why she had chosen to trust him with her mission. The day dragged on, and by midday, they reached a small ridge overlooking a valley. Ben pulled his horse to a stop, looking out over the landscape. It was a place he knew well, a stretch of land that had always felt safe and familiar. But today, it felt different. The air was thick with tension, as if something was waiting to happen. "We're close," Ayana said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a certainty that made Ben sit up straighter. She looked down at the valley, her gaze fixed on a cluster of rocks near the base of a cliff. "The artifact is buried there, beneath the rocks. But it won't be easy to get to." Ben followed her gaze, narrowing his eyes. He could see the rock she was talking about, but the terrain was rough, and the area looked dangerous. "What's standing in our way?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "The people who took it," Ayana replied, her voice steady. "They guard it, and they won't let anyone take it without a fight." Ben felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had known that there would be danger, but hearing Ayana's words made the reality of their mission hit home. They weren't just looking for an artifact. They were about to confront the very people who had stolen it in the first place. "How many are there?" Ben asked, his grip tightening on the reins of his horse. "Enough," Ayana said. "They're dangerous, but we have the element of surprise on our side. We move fast, we move smart, and we can get in and out before they know what hit them." Ben nodded, though doubt still lingered in his mind. This wasn't going to be easy, but he had already committed himself to the journey. He was in it now, for better or worse. The two of them continued down the ridge, their horses moving cautiously as they made their way toward the rocks. The closer they got, the more the sense of danger grew. Ben's heart began to pound in his chest as they reached the base of the cliff. They dismounted, and Ayana led the way toward the rocks. Ben followed her, his senses alert, every sound amplified in the stillness of the desert. As they neared the rocks, Ayana stopped suddenly, her hand held out to signal Ben to do the same. She crouched down, her eyes scanning the area. "We're not alone," she whispered. Ben froze, his body tensing. He could hear the faint sound of footsteps, light but purposeful, coming from the shadows ahead. Someone was watching them. Ayana turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "Stay close," she said, her voice low. "And don't make a sound." Ben nodded, his heart racing as they moved toward the rocks. They had to be careful. One wrong move, and they would be facing far more than just an artifact. They would be fighting for their lives. They crouched behind the rocks, the desert air thick with tension. Ben could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as Ayana's sharp eyes scanned the surrounding landscape. The footsteps they had heard earlier were growing louder, closing in on them. Ben's pulse quickened, and his hand instinctively rested on the hilt of his rifle. "Stay low and stay quiet," Ayana whispered, her voice like a breath of wind in the stillness. She gestured for him to move closer. Ben nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. The moments stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. He wasn't used to this kind of danger. Having lived alone for so long, the only threats he'd dealt with were cattle rustlers and the occasional wild animal. But this was different. This wasn't a fight for survival on his own terms. This was a battle against people who had the power to destroy everything he had come to care about. Slowly, they crept forward, the rocks offering only limited cover as they inched their way closer to the base of the cliff. Ben could feel the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. The artifact was just ahead, but so were the men who had guarded it. "They're getting closer," Ayana muttered, crouching lower. Ben could hear the rustling of clothing and the soft shuffle of boots on dirt. They were almost upon them. Without warning, Ayana sprang into action. She moved with a speed and precision that took Ben by surprise, her body flowing like water, as if she had become one with the land itself. She darted from rock to rock, using the terrain to her advantage, and Ben followed, doing his best to keep up. They reached a narrow crevice between two large boulders that offered them a perfect vantage point of the area ahead. Through the gap, Ben could see the men who had been tracking them, 5 of them in total. They were dressed in rugged clothes, their faces hard and unreadable. Ben's eyes narrowed as he studied them. These were no ordinary bandits or raiders. These were men who had been trained, men who knew how to fight and survive in this unforgiving land. They were the ones who had stolen the artifact, and now they were waiting for someone to try to take it back. Ayana's hand found Ben's, pulling him closer to the rock. "They won't just let us take it," she said softly. "We'll have to fight for it." Ben nodded, his fingers tightening around the rifle. He had always been a man of action, but this was something different. This was not just a fight for land or cattle. It was a fight for the future of Ayana's people. "I'm ready," Ben said, his voice low but determined. Ayana's eyes flickered with something, a mixture of admiration and something else, something harder to define. "Stay close," she said. "And when the time comes, we move together." They waited in silence, watching the men below. Time seemed to slow as the tension built, each second adding to the weight of what they were about to do. The men below were unaware of the two figures watching them from the rocks, too focused on the task at hand to notice the movement above. But Ayana and Ben knew that it wouldn't be long before the men discovered they were not alone. And when that moment came, there would be no turning back. Ben's grip tightened around the rifle, the weight of the weapon in his hands a reminder of the battle that lay ahead. He could feel the adrenaline surging through him, the sense of urgency growing with each passing moment. Ayana's breath was steady beside him, but Ben could sense the resolve in her, a determination to protect her people at any cost. The silence was broken by the faint sound of one of the men shifting, his boots scraping against the rocks. Ben's eyes flicked to Ayana, who gave a small nod. The time had come. Without another word, they both rose from their cover, moving with a speed that surprised even Ben. The first man didn't see them coming. Ben's rifle cracked in the silence, and the man dropped instantly, his body falling to the ground without a sound. The other men turned in shock, but Ayana was already moving. She lunged at one of them with the precision of a predator, her hands grabbing his throat and pinning him to the ground. Ben covered her, taking down another man before he had the chance to react. The final two men pulled their weapons, but it was already too late. The battle was over before it had really begun. Ben stood, his chest heaving as he surveyed the fallen men. Ayana wiped the sweat from her brow, her face hard but focused. "It's done," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. Ben nodded, his heart still racing. "Let's get the artifact," he said. Together, they moved forward, Ayana leading the way as they reached the rocks where the artifact was buried. It was time to claim what was rightfully hers, and to change the fate of her people forever. With the last of the men lying motionless on the ground, Ben and Ayana approached the base of the cliff where the artifact was said to be hidden. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the landscape, and the air felt still, almost as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Ayana moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the rocks, searching for any signs of what she had come for. Ben stood a few steps behind, still processing the battle that had just unfolded. He had never expected to be caught in something like this, let alone face off with people who had no hesitation about violence. But as he watched Ayana, he realized that for her, this fight was personal. She wasn't just retrieving an artifact. She was fighting for her people's future. Ayana stopped in front of a large boulder and crouched down, her fingers brushing against the stone. She whispered something in her native tongue, and for a moment, Ben thought she was communicating with the land itself. Then, she stood up, her eyes meeting his. "It's here," she said, her voice calm but filled with determination. She reached into a small pouch at her side and pulled out a slender, sharp blade. With practiced precision, she began to scrape away the dirt and rocks that had built up around the base of the boulder. Ben watched her work, the steady rhythm of her movements soothing the tension in his chest. He didn't know much about Apache culture, but he could tell that Ayana was a woman of deep conviction, and whatever this artifact represented, it meant everything to her. After several minutes of careful digging, Ayana's blade scraped against something solid. She paused, her fingers brushing over the surface, and then, with a swift motion, she pulled away the last of the earth. Beneath the rocks lay a small, intricately carved chest. It was weathered and worn, but there was no mistaking its significance. The artifact had been hidden here for a reason. Ayana stood up, her face a mixture of awe and solemnity. "This is it," she said softly. Ben stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the chest. It wasn't much to look at, a simple wooden box, no larger than a bread loaf, but the weight of what it represented was undeniable. "What now?" he asked. Ayana carefully bent down, her hands gently lifting the box from its hiding place. "Now, we take it back," she said, her voice filled with resolve. But just as she began to stand, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the desert. Ben's heart skipped a beat. It was a sound he had heard before, and one that sent a chill down his spine. the distant thundering of hooves. Ayana's head snapped up, her expression hardening. "They're coming," she said. "They must have heard the gunfire." Ben cursed under his breath. The last thing he wanted was another fight, but they had no choice. They couldn't leave without the artifact, and they couldn't let the people who had taken it get their hands on it again. "We need to move," Ben said, already grabbing his rifle. Ayana nodded, securing the box under her arm. "Follow me," she said, and with a swift motion, she darted toward the rocks on the other side of the ridge. Ben followed close behind, his senses heightened, every nerve alert. The sound of the hooves was growing louder, the men from the fight earlier surely regrouping and coming to track them down. They had only one chance to escape. They scrambled up the rocky terrain, Ayana leading the way with remarkable agility. Ben struggled to keep up, his boots slipping on the loose gravel, but he pressed on. They reached a small ledge, just high enough to give them a vantage point over the valley below. Ben looked out across the desert, scanning for any signs of the approaching riders. He could see them now, silhouetted against the fading light, 5 men on horseback, moving quickly toward their location. Ayana turned to him, her face grim. "We can't outrun them," she said. Ben gritted his teeth. He wasn't used to running. "What do we do?" Ayana glanced down at the artifact in her hands, then back at Ben. "We hold our ground," she said. "If they want it, they'll have to fight for it." Ben nodded, understanding. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As the riders drew closer, he could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the familiar weight of the rifle in his hands. He wasn't ready to let go of this artifact, not without a fight. Not after everything they had been through. The riders were almost upon them now, and Ben could make out their faces. These were the same men they had fought earlier. The ones who had stolen what rightfully belonged to Ayana's people. They had no idea what they were about to walk into. "Get ready," Ayana said, her voice calm but firm. "They'll try to take it from us, but we won't let them." Ben nodded again, his mind focused on the task ahead. They had the advantage of surprise, and that was enough. For now, at least. As the first rider reached the ledge, Ayana and Ben were already in motion. The battle for the artifact was about to begin. The riders were now within range, and Ben's heart was pounding in his chest as he took cover behind a rock. His rifle was ready, aimed at the first rider who had just crested the ridge. The wind was picking up, blowing dust into his eyes, but he kept his focus. This was the moment he had been dreading, but also the one he knew would come. The riders, 5 in total, were fast and precise in their approach, each one moving in sync like well-trained soldiers. They had the advantage of numbers, but Ben and Ayana had something they didn't, the element of surprise. The first rider, a tall man with a scar running down his face, was leading the charge. Ben squeezed the trigger, and the sharp crack of his rifle echoed through the valley. The rider fell, his horse rearing up in shock. The others quickly reacted, pulling their guns from their holsters, but it was too late. Ayana was already on the move, darting out from behind the rock with a speed that took Ben by surprise. She was like a force of nature, moving with the precision of a predator. She tackled the second rider, knocking him from his horse and disarming him in a swift motion. Ben fired again, taking down another rider before the others could get organized. But the battle wasn't over yet. The remaining 2 riders pulled back, seeking cover behind the boulders and shrubs. Ben's heart raced as he scanned the area, trying to track their movements. He knew they were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. "They're not giving up that easily," Ben muttered, his eyes never leaving the horizon. Ayana, now back at his side, nodded. "We need to finish this before they regroup. They won't stop until they have what they came for." Ben nodded in agreement. They had to end it now. Without hesitation, they moved out from their cover and advanced toward the remaining riders. Ayana led the charge, her steps confident and measured. Ben followed closely, his rifle ready. The wind howled around them, adding to the chaos of the moment, but neither of them flinched. As they neared the rocks, one of the riders jumped out from behind a boulder, aiming his gun directly at Ayana. Without thinking, Ben fired first. The bullet hit its mark, and the rider dropped to the ground, his gun clattering against the rocks. That left only one rider, the leader, the man with the scar. He was now cornered, his back pressed against a large boulder, his gun aimed at them both. "You think you can take this from me?" the man shouted, his voice laced with fury. "You'll regret this." Ben and Ayana exchanged a glance. They were both breathing heavily, their bodies covered in sweat and dirt from the fight. But there was no fear in their eyes, just determination. "We don't want your trouble," Ayana said, her voice calm but firm. "We just want the artifact. And you'll leave here with nothing." The man sneered, clearly unwilling to back down. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he growled. "I'll die before I let you take it." He raised his gun, aiming straight at Ben. But before he could pull the trigger, Ayana lunged forward with lightning speed, disarming him in a fluid motion. The man stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. Ben stepped forward, his rifle aimed at the man's chest. "You're not getting another shot off," Ben said coldly. The man's face twisted in anger, but he said nothing. With a swift motion, Ben knocked the gun from his hand and stepped back. "You're done," Ben said, his voice firm. The fight was over. The leader of the riders stood there, breathing heavily, his eyes still burning with defiance, but he knew the battle had been lost. "Take him with us," Ayana said, her voice firm. "We'll let the tribe decide his fate." Ben nodded. They had won, but the fight wasn't over yet. They still had to return the artifact, and there would be more challenges ahead. But for now they had triumphed. Together, they had fought and won. As Ayana looked down at the artifact, still clutched in her hands, a sense of relief washed over her. This was just the beginning, but they had taken the first step. The journey was far from over, but they had each other. And with that, they turned and began the trek back, the weight of what they had accomplished settling in. The desert stretched out before them, vast and empty, but with a new sense of purpose and determination, they moved forward. Ben and Ayana began their trek back toward the ranch, the evening sky now a deep shade of purple, dotted with the first stars of the night. The air had cooled significantly, and the once scorching desert now felt crisp and fresh. Despite their victory, there was a quiet tension between them, an unspoken understanding that the real battle was far from over. They had retrieved the artifact, but it was just the beginning of what Ayana had promised would be a much larger fight. As they walked, Ben couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. He had always thought of his life as simple. Wake up, tend to the cattle, fix the fences, and go to bed. But in just a few short days, everything had changed. He had gone from a quiet rancher to a reluctant participant in a mission that could change the fate of an entire people. Ayana, the giant Apache woman who had appeared out of nowhere, had brought him into a world that he didn't fully understand, but one that he was now a part of. He glanced at her now, her face set with determination, her eyes focused ahead. She had been through so much, and yet she carried herself with an air of quiet strength. Ben had always been a man of few words, but he felt the urge to ask her more questions, to learn about her past and what had brought her to this point. He had always been alone, but there was something about Ayana that made him feel like he wasn't, that he could be part of something greater than himself. He wanted to know more. "Ayana," he said, breaking the silence. She glanced at him, but didn't slow her pace. "What happens next?" Ayana's jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't look surprised by the question. "Next," she said slowly, "we return to my people. The artifact will be presented to the council. They will decide what happens after that. But there's more at stake than just this." Ben raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Ayana took a deep breath, her eyes on the path ahead. "The artifact is just the first step. It's a symbol of what we've lost, but it's also a tool to help us reclaim what's ours. My people have been pushed to the edge, driven from our land, forced to live in the shadows. But with this artifact, we have a chance to change that." Ben nodded, but the weight of her words hit him harder than he expected. He had always thought of Native American tribes as distant stories in his history books, but this was real. These weren't just people from the past. They were people with lives, with struggles, with a future that had been stolen from them. He could see the fire in Ayana's eyes, a fire that wasn't just about survival, but about justice. "You're not just fighting for land, are you?" Ben asked quietly. Ayana turned to face him now, her expression softening for the first time since they had met. "No," she said, her voice steady. "We're fighting for our dignity, for our place in this world. We have to show the world that we are not just a memory. We are not just a people who can be forgotten." Ben felt a swell of respect for her. He had been drawn into this fight, but now he understood why. This wasn't just about a piece of land or a relic. It was about something much bigger, It was about fighting for a people who had been silenced, for a culture that had been nearly erased. As they continued their journey, Ben's mind was filled with questions about Ayana's tribe, about her life, about the enemies they would face. But more than that, he felt a deep sense of responsibility. This wasn't just her fight anymore, it was theirs. They were allies now, and he wasn't going to let her fight alone. "I'll stand with you," Ben said, his voice steady. "I don't know what's ahead, but I'll help you fight for it." Ayana looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of hesitation. But she found none. Slowly she nodded. "Thank you, Ben. You don't know what this means to me." Ben's chest tightened at her words. He had never expected to be in this position, but now that he was, he couldn't imagine turning back. The sound of hooves reached their ears, and Ben instinctively turned his head. In the distance, a group of riders appeared on the horizon. Ben's heart raced. He wasn't sure who they were, but he knew they weren't coming to greet them with open arms. "They're close," Ayana said, her voice low. "Get ready." Ben's hand instinctively went to the rifle slung across his back. This time, he was ready. They had come so far, and they weren't about to stop now. The battle was not over, but they were stronger for it. Together, they would face whatever came next. The riders grew closer, their figures becoming clearer as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the desert. Ben and Ayana stood still, watching as the group of men approached. There were 6 of them, all mounted, and their posture suggested they weren't here for a friendly conversation. The horses they rode were fast and well kept, indicating that these were no ordinary travelers. They had the look of men who had spent their lives in the saddle, hardened by the unforgiving land. Ben's grip tightened around his rifle, and Ayana moved closer, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of her blade. She had faced threats like this before, but this time, it was different. They weren't just looking to take what was hers. They were coming for something far more dangerous, the artifact. "We don't know who they are, but they're too close to let go unnoticed," Ben whispered, his voice low but filled with a sense of urgency. Ayana nodded. "They may have been sent by the ones we fought before. They won't stop until they have it." Ben scanned the horizon, looking for any signs of movement beyond the riders. He knew this land well enough to sense that there was more to this situation than just a confrontation. He had lived on these plains long enough to know that danger wasn't always where you expected it. "We need to make our stand now," Ayana said, her voice steady despite the tension that crackled between them. "We can't let them take it." Ben looked at her, the fire in her eyes burning with an intensity that matched his own. There was no turning back now. They had already fought for this artifact, and they weren't going to let it slip away. The riders were almost within range now, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they drew closer. Ben took a deep breath, preparing himself for what was about to come. He had been through plenty of gunfights in his life, but this felt different. This wasn't just about surviving. This was about protecting something bigger than himself. This was about standing alongside Ayana, someone who had shown him a new side of the world he had never known. Ayana looked at him, her eyes steady. "We stand together," she said, her words a promise. Ben nodded in agreement, a sense of unity settling over him. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was part of something far greater than himself. As the riders finally came into view, their faces were set with cold determination. Ben could see the leader, a man with a long scar running across his face, leading the group. He recognized the look in his eyes, a look that said they weren't going to stop without a fight. The leader raised a hand, signaling for the riders to halt. "We know you have it," the man called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "Hand over the artifact, and no one gets hurt." Ben's heart raced, but his grip on the rifle remained steady. Ayana stepped forward, her posture proud and unwavering. "You're not taking it," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You'll have to kill me first." The leader's eyes narrowed, and he signaled to his men. "That can be arranged." In an instant, the riders dismounted, drawing their weapons with practiced ease. Ben's pulse quickened, but he didn't flinch. The first shot rang out, a high-pitched crack that echoed across the desert. The leader's gunfire missed, but the tension in the air was palpable. Without hesitation, Ben fired back, the rifle in his hand steady as he aimed at the rider closest to him. The shot landed, and the man fell, his body hitting the ground with a thud. Ayana was already in motion, her blade flashing as she took down another rider. She moved with the grace of someone who had been fighting her entire life, each strike precise and deadly. Ben fired again, taking down another rider as he tried to circle behind them. The remaining riders were quickly realizing that they were outmatched. But the leader wasn't giving up that easily. He raised his gun, aiming directly at Iona. Ben didn't hesitate. He fired once more, the bullet striking the leader's hand and sending his gun flying from his grasp. The man let out a curse, but before he could react, Iona was upon him, disarming him with a swift, fluid movement. She forced him to the ground, pinning him with one powerful hand. "You're done," Iona said, her voice cold and final. Ben approached, his rifle still aimed at the fallen riders. "We don't want any more bloodshed," he said. "Leave now, and you can walk away." The leader glared at them, his face twisted in anger and defeat. "You'll regret this," he spat. Iona didn't flinch. "Not as much as you will," she said, her eyes cold with resolve. With that, the remaining riders slowly backed away, mounting their horses and retreating into the desert. The fight was over, but the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Ben and Iona stood together, watching them go. "It's done," Ben said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Iona nodded, but her face was unreadable. "It's not over," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This is just the beginning." Ben knew she was right. The battle for the artifact was far from finished, but for the first time, he felt like they were on the right path. Together, they had stood strong. And together, they would face whatever came next. The sun had fully set now, and the desert was bathed in a cool twilight. Ben and Iona made their way back to the base of the ridge where the artifact had been hidden, their steps steady but heavy with the weight of everything that had transpired. The riders they had fought were now just a memory, but the aftermath of their encounter lingered in the air. The quiet of the desert, the calm that followed the storm of battle, felt both peaceful and unnerving. "It's over," Ben said, his voice quiet as he glanced at Iona. She nodded, but there was no joy in her expression, no sense of relief. She had always known. This moment was coming, but that didn't make it easier. The fight for the artifact was just a single chapter in a much larger story. "It's just the beginning," she replied softly, her gaze scanning the horizon. Ben understood what she meant. The artifact was important, yes, but it was only a symbol, a key to something far greater. The real battle was yet to come. As they walked side by side, the weight of the task ahead grew heavier. The council awaited them, the tribe that had placed their trust in Iona, hoping that this artifact would bring change, bring peace. But Ben knew that peace wasn't something that could be handed over in a simple artifact. It had to be earned, fought for, and protected. "What will the council say?" Ben asked, the question lingering in the air between them. Iona paused, looking at him. "They'll listen, but whether they agree with me is another matter." She sighed, a rare vulnerability slipping into her voice. "There are those among them who believe we should keep fighting, that this is just another battle in a long war. And there are others who believe in peace, in rebuilding what we've lost. I don't know which way they'll go." Ben's heart went out to her. He had seen the pain in her eyes, the years of struggle, the weight of her people's history bearing down on her. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a leader, carrying the hopes and dreams of a people who had been silenced for far too long. "You're doing what's right," Ben said firmly. Iona met his eyes, and for a moment, the weight of everything seemed to lift, just a little. She gave him a small, appreciative smile. "I hope so. But the council is not an easy place to win favor." They reached the camp just as the first stars appeared in the sky. The tribe's campfires flickered in the distance, a quiet reminder of the people waiting for Iona's return. As they approached, several of the tribe's elders stood to greet them, their faces filled with expectation. Iona stepped forward, the artifact still in her hands, her posture regal, though the fatigue of the journey was evident in her eyes. She raised the artifact high, a symbol of her people's resilience, of the fight they had endured. "I have returned," she said, her voice strong and unwavering, "with the artifact that will change the course of our future." The elder closest to her, an older woman with silver hair, stepped forward. Her eyes scanned the artifact, then met Iona's. "You've done well, daughter," she said, her voice filled with approval. But as she spoke, Ben could see the skepticism in the eyes of some of the other elders. Not everyone was convinced that this artifact was the answer to the tribe's struggles. Iona stood her ground, unshaken by the scrutiny. "This is not just a symbol," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It is the key to our future, to our survival. We have a chance to rebuild, to restore what was lost. But we must act together as one." The elder nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "And what of the warriors who guard it?" she asked, referring to the men who had tried to take it back from them. Iona's expression hardened once more. "They will not stop until they have it," she said. "But we cannot let fear dictate our actions. We must fight for what is rightfully ours, not just for ourselves, but for our children, for the generations that will come after us." There was a long pause as the elders exchanged looks, the weight of Iona's words settling over them. Finally, the elder who had spoken earlier stepped forward. "You have shown great courage," she said, her voice filled with respect. "And you have the support of the council." There was a murmur of agreement from the others. Iona's eyes shone with gratitude, but she didn't allow herself to soften completely. The battle was far from over. "This is just the beginning," she said again, her gaze turning toward Ben, who stood a few paces behind her. "But it's a start." Ben nodded, feeling a deep sense of relief. For the first time, he truly understood the weight of what they had fought for. This was more than just an artifact. This was about hope, about a future that could be different. And with Iona by his side, he knew they could face whatever came next. The council had spoken, and now it was time to take the next step forward, together.